joining me for another weekly privacy chat. Happy 2023 to all of our friends. This is one of our regular informal Friday privacy chats. Sometimes we talk about the pressing issues of the day, and sometimes we grab a special friend to get a couple of additional insights beyond my pontificating on some of the special issues of the day. So I'm really happy that today an old friend, old and wise, and super energized, full of energy and passion for what she's doing, smart friend, Shoshana Rosenberg, who many of you know from her many careers leading privacy at organizations. But Shoshana, who I've always learned from and has always had interesting insights and thoughtful ideas about the role of the chief privacy officer, the role of legal privacy compliance. Shoshana has in recent years launched effort that I found fascinating. I've been excited to help provide input and advice, and frankly, I've learned a lot from what she is doing. Well, what's the problem that she is addressing? I routinely hear from colleagues in law, in policy, in HR, that they're eager to figure out how to do better at building a more diverse workforce, people of different abilities, race, ethnicity, all the challenges that we have to address in the workplace that can best be challenged when you've got people with life experience and who are uniquely affected sometimes by the products and services that we all provide. And hopefully most of us are motivated because we know it's good business and it's good human rights and morality. But there are also legal mandates around the world requiring reporting, encouraging reporting, ESG, all sorts of requirements. That data is, however, very often under increasingly US and certainly lots of global regimes, sensitive data, special category data, restricted in various ways. And so those of us who live at the intersection of law and compliance are continually scratching our heads, worrying about legal risk, worrying about employee consents, worrying about employees not being able to consent, all of the problems that many of you know. And Shoshana had a plan, and the plan was to do more than debate it and discuss it. Shoshana, welcome, and tell us about SafePorter. And I think particularly unique that this emerged out of your real life experience dealing with DEI issues on the legal and privacy side. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And I'm actually really honored. And Jules, I learned from you and from the FPF constantly, and from Anne, as a matter of fact. So it's wonderful to be here. And I will say, what really struck me at some point, pre-GDPR, right, for those of us who've been in this for a while, was this understanding through working with different businesses that organizations around the world were trying to in some way represent what they were doing with regard to diversity, and now, thank goodness, more so inclusion, because we understand that that's actually the place where diversity will take hold. But there was reporting going on around original gender in Europe, right? And understanding that they were trying to report this out as a way to flag the organization as something welcoming and inclusive, but that really the notion that this would ever pass through HR it was acutely offensive to me. And I was also pursuing my MBA and focusing in on DEI there. So the things came together, the peanut butter and chocolate of sort of realizing I see a problem and an opportunity all at once. And this was from actually, it wasn't just from my experience, it was from other DPOs and chief privacy officers. When I was leading global privacy, I was involved in a large network of those. So it was understanding that and wanting to really see how we could go about making sure that somehow diversity data and inclusion feedback could be, having also worked in employment law, could be something that didn't make a vulnerability from a data standpoint for either the individual or the organization. So that was the problem to tackle, and to remove it from identity in such a way that it wasn't part of some larger system. So the vision was simply, and I'll end it here, was to find a way to serve as a data trust, almost a bank, where an individual can keep that information apart from their identity surrounding information, the actual contact information, or any way that you would know exactly who they are, and remove it in accordance with their data rights and change it as needed.
Welcome, Anne Toth. Anne is our VIP surprise guest today. Anne has led strategy and HR and trust initiatives at companies ranging from Amazon to Slack, Yahoo to Google, and has worked at the World Economic Forum, is an advisor to FPF, and has recently been sharing some insights and feedback with Shoshana. So, and thanks for dropping in. Can you also give us sort of a take? I mean, I believe I introduced you to Shoshana, and you, I think, immediately had a sense that this was a problem that needed to be solved because of both the legal and privacy challenges of collecting sensitive data about employees, but also you've worked directly with CEOs and senior executives. I think there is a passion for doing the right thing, and doing the right thing increasingly is actually understanding where things stand. Right? You don't know whether you have a diverse workforce unless you figure that out by counting and asking, and that's pretty complicated sometimes, right?
It is. And thank you for inviting me. And it's lovely to be here with you all, both of you. I was an accidental chief human resources officer. I started my work in particular at Slack, working on privacy and security issues. But we were trying to build a really different kind of an organization there. And we knew that we had an opportunity to do this quite differently. So when we started voluntarily reporting, and this is something that I think, particularly in the tech sector, people really want to understand just how, well, quite frankly, how bad is it, right? Like how abysmal are our numbers relative to other organizations? And the only benchmarks are the really big companies, the Apples, the Microsofts, the Facebooks, the Googles. And so we thought, okay, we'll make this, we'll be one of the first smaller organizations to start to do this. We had a few challenges with that. One is that it has to be voluntarily reported. And so the question was, well, what categories do we include? Do we let people self-report? How do we make them feel comfortable reporting this information? And quite honestly, even though I think our employees really trusted us to use this data in the best possible way, there was reluctance to share it, right? And so you wind up with a real problem of underreporting in those instances because people are just, I think, quite honestly, and I think with good reason, reluctant to share this information. And so that was the challenge that we faced. And so when I spoke with Shoshana, I was really excited about what she was trying to do, because I've seen it both from the standpoint of employee data, but then I also have seen it from the standpoint of trying to make your data sets more inclusive, but not being sure of how to store the data in a way that's safe for your customers, never mind your employees. So I think there are a lot of applications of this particular technology. And I think it's a great example of a real privacy enhancing technology being built into both enterprise applications as well as consumer-based applications. I think there's a lot of potential for it.
Thanks, Anne. So what is the it? So Shoshana, how have you set forward a product that helps DEI people, privacy leads, companies, HR folks? What is it? What does it do? How does it work?
So I'm happy to tell you, but I do want to leap off of something that Anne said, right? Which is this notion of trust. And trust, really, Lily Zhang, they recently said it best, and they are an exceptionally well-versed and important person in DEI in the space right now. They said that trust is the currency of change in their recent book. And I really think that that's worth latching onto and understanding that trust is a place where privacy and DEI overlap, right? One actually begets the other if you do it right in theory. So, and one other thing that Anne said, so I can say where this grows into, is when sometimes I think more than it used to be, it was about how bad is it, right? Like how off base are we? But for those organizations now that have been making progress against the notion of, is everything as imbalanced as it was, right? There's also this understanding of, especially with remote workforces and all of this, who are we as an organization? How do you be inclusive to a full universe when you don't really understand the people that you're speaking to, except in the way that you've allowed them to be comfortable presenting? Right? So we all have that sort of, and coach switching happens for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. So sorry to sort of take you on a detour, Jules, but I wanted to contextualize it, which is it's not just about getting that data. It's also about allowing for inclusion feedback, in a way that keeps both the organization and the individual safe, which is part of what we build in. So we started as a B Corp partly because, as Anne mentioned, those benchmarking numbers are simply not out there. We want to do some good and make a difference in DEI overall in a way that doesn't cost the researchers or the academics who are involved in it, where we can give insights, not data, but insights broadly around industries and regions and particular sectors. What we've done is we've simply removed the identity aspect. So without going too far into the detail, we work with organizations, whether it's universities or organizations working with their employees, or in some cases it's with their members, or for NGOs, right? We're helping to eliminate the data risk completely around sensitive DEI information by making sure two things happen. One, that the data privacy rights are enshrined for that individual, that they can access, delete, and of course opt out of providing that information, but that the organization gets the things that it needs to report, whether for government reporting or to look for inclusion issues, but that it's all done where the organization doesn't have access to the data itself, except in a privacy by design aggregate. So it's not simply aggregated data. We actually have algorithms in place, and we have worked very hard with a number of different privacy by design consultants to make sure that we are keeping insights at a place where it won't identify individuals. And then SafePorter has absolutely no way to know who's reporting. They are tied to an organization, but they are not tied to any contact information whatsoever. So that was strictly it. It's removing identity and allowing the facilitation of surveys and survey IDs to come through the client themselves to the individual. And we provide that wall. And as a controller, we have a duty to the individual and not to the client. So it's very clear.
So give us some sense of how this works. I'm an employee. I get a communication, I guess an email from my employer. We're doing a survey. We want to understand this and this and this. Please click here to complete this information. That then goes to your organization?
So yes, so we have three aspects. I didn't know how far in the weeds you want to get. We have three aspects. So we have my data protected, which is where you, Jules, if you know, or Anne, if she's the new employee at the FPF, or myself, where we would get an email from the organization that says, we invite you to participate in our diversity and belonging survey, and informs them fully of what they'll be asked and that they'll have the option to opt out. And it provides them both with a unique ID and with a quick link to go there with the ID embedded. And then they go to my data protected, and they're able to fill out that information. If something changes, or they suddenly realize that, you know, there's too much information about me in the world, I don't care if it's safe, I want to delete it, they can always do that at any time, or make a change if there's a 23andMe report that makes them want to represent differently. And they go there. One thing before I go too far is I will say, you'll notice in almost all reporting that things are very, very limited for government reporting. Most of our clients are expanding what they're asking to things like, do you identify as a caregiver? Or are there any ability or mental health issues that you want to flag? And so we allow for that. But we also push something through that is very specific to us, and it's the only question that you can't customize or remove on our surveys, which is it allows a more fulsome representation around heritage, race, and cultural background, so that someone that wants to be fully represented in the aggregate, we don't necessarily allow for any sort of drill down that gives you particular insights, but you will notice that for a lot of our clients, 4 or 5 characteristics are being included. And for a good portion of them, in some cases, it's religion and other things. So the other aspect is the organization. Sorry if I got off track. The organization has our data protected, which gives them a dashboard that's branded and it's customizable, but it's their aggregate view of what they're tracking and against their own goals, as well as, you know, how many people have reported and worked through. And all of that actually is set up for them in such a way that a global organization can have a global piece and then select down to look as far as privacy by design allows into the region, so long as they're large enough. And then the last part is the client-side application. So the key to it here is that the client-side application is essentially, I describe it as an email vending machine with certain characteristics built in per client. and it sits on their server. And the only thing it sends to us are IDs and whether or not they're activated, deactivated, or assigned a new survey. This is something we integrate with Workday and several other ERPs so that it's not privacy technology that we all abhor, where you have to hire people to run it or spend a lot of time training them. It's a very straightforward universe that either automated or not is very easy to engage with.
Now, there's a lot of skepticism in the privacy community around de-identification. So many examples that are well publicized of data that was represented as de-identified, but yet had some unique identifier in it that allowed users to be singled out, or other secondary data that could have been linked to outside data. Can you give me some
I'm smiling. It's my favorite question. Hit me.
Yeah, give me some certainty that simply hashing an email and an identifier and having another party hold it, isn't going to guarantee that a determined attacker or a nefarious HR person, or how do you deal with that? There are some, if there's only one Black employee who's got a disability in that business unit, well, that's obviously going to be revealing. Do you have guarantees on cell sizes? Do you
This is perfect.
Assess this using any differential privacy type assessments? What's talk DID for us?
So differential privacy is the key, but there are a couple of things you touched on, and I did not ask you to ask me this question. We can all testify, but I'm so thrilled you did. There are a couple of things. Let's start at the beginning. What does the employer have? Technically, the employer does have the ID number, right? So if you were to click through on that link, even you as the employee cannot see your own answers. So I want that to sit there. So there's no way to follow Shoshana or Anne in and see what they put. Now you might say, wait a minute, how can I do a DSAR? So for those of us who are privacy, which I think most of us are, I will say this: the DSAR is a request that is simply the ID number email sent to the employer or the university by the individual who they can verify is still a part of that organization, because if they're not, we don't have their data. And then they send it on and we deal with them directly through the email provided, but you can't follow in. So the hashing in terms of hashing an ID number, that's not, on that side, it's not an issue. In terms of what we do, there are a couple things. One, when I'm speaking about this to privacy professionals, I particularly like to emphasize the notion that the Isle of Skye, in a hypothetical world, has created a geolocated data set requirement, which, by the way, we are a transferless technology. No personal data, except for where you would be worried it's still not personal data because we do have these controls in place. No personal data leaves the region of origin or the country of origin, depending. But let's go with the ad absurdum that the Isle of Skye.
It's not stored at the client. It is stored at
the region where it was collected.
So with some cloud server,
right. And
control.
Yes. And that is connected only to an ID number for that organization. So the Isle of Skye, let's just say that we get breached, because anyone in the world can get breached, right? We've proven this, the NSA, all of it. Despite all of the security, despite AWS, despite everything, we are breached. And there's only one, I'm going to use me, Irish Jewish comic book collector, female, over 40, right? In all of the Isle of Skye. And the breach comes out and it shows that this person exists, right? Now, any additional characteristics there could be a vulnerability. If I said I'm an introvert or I have a disability, but other than that, what you're getting, which is inherently identifiable information, there is no denying it. You know that they are tied to an entity because we have the actual identity name in a separate database. So everyone is tied to an entity. So this person exists, and in this ad absurdum notion, you might be able to get the following characteristics, but it is a very, very far cry from what I would consider to be vulnerability of a data subject. So that is a piece of it, and you can argue back at me, but we've done all that we could to insulate that and to make sure that that is what we hold is only what they give us, and that we don't have any information or a way to trace back to them. Now, we never use the word anonymous, because you could hack both systems and you could connect those. But when you're looking at a way to keep individuals safe, we have put everything in place that we could to make sure that that information that you turn over, if it was on the front page of the New York Times as a set of data points, unless you're geolocated to someplace as small as the Isle of Skye, it's not going to be able to say who you are.
So, Anne, your take, having worked at a range of organizations, why isn't everyone already doing this? It feels like a solution that needed to exist sort of 10 years ago. What's your, are we going to be reading about Shoshana, doing the next big billion-dollar unicorn IPO? Where is this sort of technology, and where is this going? Why doesn't it exist already? It feels like it existed in between law and policy people who kind of wanted it, but HR folks who had a lot of other agendas and maybe didn't fully appreciate the concerns. There's such a drive in that community to collect this data, and obviously the employee sensitivities, which those folks are sensitive to. But what's drill up. Shoshana was in the bits and bytes. Drill up for us for a second. Where
I
is
have
it?
lots of thoughts. First of all, I hope we do find out that Shoshana is running like an amazing unicorn company in like 2, 10, 5 years, who knows, because there aren't enough women founders of unicorn type companies. So the more the merrier. And I hope this is one of them. As to why this doesn't exist, I have a few theories on that. We're having this conversation after tech has laid off a lot of people in the last week. I don't know that HR people within these companies are the most trusted individuals in these organizations at the present moment. Just saying. I'm going to be a little inflammatory. I'm a little throw a few firebombs here and there, but if your companies like Google could build this sort of technology, but if you're inside of Google, are you going to try? I mean, it's a little bit of like a little self-dealing going on there. And so do you trust them to build the thing that's going to protect your identity when you're reporting to them? And I think that's one of the big challenges, is that this technology that Shoshana has described, is not super technical, right? It's not like crazy it's not quantum computing. I mean, this stuff is pretty straightforward, but I think you need to have a trusted third party to build it and to implement it for it to be useful and for individuals to trust it. I mean, this whole week I've been talking about trust in light of International Data Privacy Day, and we have a lot going on this week, but it really comes back down to, who do you trust to build this? And I think in this particular instance, having an organization like this that is a B Corp, that is founded with a real ethical grounding, be available to then make this a tool that many different companies can use. I think that's really the key to success in something like this.
I do have a theory, Jules, to say, and I thank you, Anne, and certainly I don't know what I hope for, except that we can continue to be good for the people who need us and know that they need us at this point, and they're realizing. But I will say, one of the reasons I also think it didn't exist is that diversity, equity, inclusion, and diversity and belonging and justice, right? This is in a space which companies arrived at, in some cases, dragging their feet. And now they realize that if they want to exist in the future, it's part of their ESG program. But what happens also is that organizations hire the individuals that they want to help put DEI in place, but then they're not always ready to make those changes. And without the data, the individuals, just like we all fought so hard to say, wait, I swear to you, privacy matters. And here cometh GDPR finally, and the fines were big enough that you could really wave that around, right? Well, that data, that little piece of information did a lot for privacy, and of course for the landscape and for organizations to be pulled forward. But for ESG, for DEI, when an individual walks in to make change, they're often asked to make change that the business can't see what's happening with regard to, and see the trends and see any quantifiable results, except for hiring, which unfortunately is something that's always going to keep moving.
One trend that we've seen, and part of this, I think, is the post-COVID era, hopefully post-COVID era, and maybe also just, this young generation, is much more comfort with people talking about mental health issues in the workplace, right? All of our young employees want us to know that they're stressed, that they feel tension, they feel all the problems of the world, all the challenges, and they want their employer to be aware and know and support. And we know colleges are being challenged. Kids aren't going to class. And we want colleges and employers and other organizations doing more, but perhaps no greater area of workplace sensitivity than mental health. You see employers wanting to avoid liability. I mean, all the problems that come with the risks. How does mental health or similar ability-related issues change the dynamic in any way, or is it just another? Is there any difference between checking off, race and ethnicity or sexual orientation, and the nuances of mental health, which can range from disability issues to I'm depressed, but I'm not sure if I've got a clinical diagnosis. How do you deal with that? Did you have to do anything different? Are there any nuances that that are raised by mental health issues?
It's a brilliant question, and actually there are. So there are a couple things. I'm going to approach this two ways. One is to say that part of what we allow for, because we're not trying to also do DEI consulting, because we are truly a bank for the feedback and data of individuals, and we do no other thing, and we will not. We are able to do another piece, which is our clients get 15 surveys, additional surveys a year that they can put in. They can add more, but that's what comes with the subscription, as well as the inclusion feedback portal, which they might turn off because they're not ready for it, which some clients aren't. They get to add in surveys like, do you like the CEO? Or are you overly stressed at your job? Or surveys that include a number of these, and then allow people to opt in to allow their aggregate diversity data to accompany that in the dashboard where privacy by design allows, so that you can actually not only get an understanding, but see if people are disproportionately affected within your organization. Now, if it doesn't come in as a chart, it might come in as an insight, right? Where we can say you do have X kind of representation, or you do have a number of people in this community representing this. One other thing is I should say this, I meant to say this before, but we don't allow for intersectionality, which would be identifiable, though we can give insights that give you a bigger picture. Now, the other thing I was going to say about that is that we are inclusion by design as much as we are privacy by design. So when you look at the clients can change most aspects of this, but when you look at the pronouns, our initial offering for our templates is very, very comprehensive. The same is true for mental health, as a very long list of components, either disability or other ability. And then in some cases, the client's willing to actually add it as a mental health component. So I think it's really important that you not only make it available, but that you drill down into all of these nuances that you're describing. And we do add in, we have a number of things, and we're always taking suggestions from our clients. And actually, there's a place where you can add a suggestion that doesn't tie to your ID and goes to another service, so that we can see what we should add in. If, for instance, depressed but functional, but not sure it'll last for long is something you want to put in, we might find a way to add that in a more succinct way.
So let's talk legal compliance just for another second, though, right? Given our audience here. Employees are expressly consenting and the data is being collected in a de-identified manner. How have your clients who implemented this, and I know you've had some, prominent, well-known global brands and so forth, what's been the legal structure? Has it been, obviously, relying on employee consent has got limits. It's
not employee consent.
Okay, so they do agree because they don't have to, but the basis for the collection is that the data is de-identified, or what's the...
So SafePorter is the controller. We are collecting the data, and the insights are allowed to but the personal data. So when I talked about not transferring, what actually comes from those regions, if you were to break into the dashboard, you would get the percentages and the language that you see on the dashboard. And percentages and language are not personal data unless they are identifiable in context, which we have used a lot of controls and algorithms to make sure that we have differential privacy built in, and they're not. So it's the same sort of a thing, which is that you are giving your personal information over directly to SafePorter, who you are giving consent to. The ways in which we're allowed to use it are restricted to this particular way to represent to this client in the de-identified and privacy by design aggregate, with insights where it can't be represented otherwise, and nothing where it can. And this is a big piece, though, is DEI, when I am talking to a client or our staff are talking to clients, they're very quick to say, you do surrender something, right? When you went to law school, the first thing they showed you was take your weakest argument and lead with it. Your DEI team cannot work with the intersectionality data. They don't get to play with the actual data. It's going to feel like a loss, but where people trust you, you will get more. That said, if you only have one person of color or you only have one of something, you are not going to see that. It may be that over time, if you've added enough people, you may see after a year, if you've only hired a couple of people, you won't see anything. And if you add enough, you may say you do have non-binary representation, right? That might be all that you get. But in the end, these little pieces of insights have helped our clients to build big changes into their organizations and how they approach things. And as a B Corp, you may know we have to actually survey our clients as to what changes they've made over the course of a year as a result of using us.
Anne, I'm going to give you the last word.
I just wanted to chime in and just say that the one thing that I really have been impressed by in talking to Shoshana is just the extensibility of these tools. And I am 100% certain that she and the organization have not really even fully considered all the different use cases, because customers will bring those use cases to the table and it'll be that aha light bulb moment of like, I didn't know we could use it for that. But it turns out if it's useful for one organization, it's probably going to be useful for more than one organization. And the very, and every organization, even if they're not global today, aspires to be global someday. And the idea of what it means to be diverse, inclusive, welcoming in different countries around the world is very, very different. And so I think that the ability for this tool to be useful for organizations as they grow in different parts of the world without having to be concerned as much as most organizations are about the various privacy rules that vary so dramatically, particularly with HR data. It's even more different, I think, than when you're dealing with customer data. That's what gets me excited about tools like this, is the ability to think big in that regard. And so for that, I'm super excited for what the future holds.
Well, thank you, Anne, and thank you, Shoshana. And I'm delighted that this is the conversation we had during Data Privacy Week. I was at a meeting yesterday with a number of leaders who were debating how to deal with AI regulation. And one of the people in the room, the only person of color in the room, said, I'm the only person at this table here who's a person of color. And the issues we're talking about are human rights issues, are issues that are particularly impactful on marginalized communities. I'm happy to have my privacy protected and respected, but I'm a straight white male who's, senior in my organization. I can be hanging out there with less repercussions or less risk than, somebody who's going to be fired or mistreated based on race or ethnicity or another challenge that's brought to the table. And we can't well speak for the way people who have lived experience can actually tell us, here's how I do want you using data to help me, and here's how and where I think it's at risk. So, when we talk about the DEI conversation, it's easy to say, well, we need data about all sorts of people, right? No, we need people from the relevant communities not only being at the table in terms of employees and leaders, but helping understand how we should shape the future of data protection law so that indeed we are well integrating the full representation of both benefits and harms. And you can't pontificate that answer from a position of privilege or a position of lack of knowledge. So really delighted that our Data Privacy Week, Data Privacy Day discussion is one that focused on a company I'm super excited about, and a great friend, Shoshana Rosenberg, and Anne, who I always learn a great deal from. Thanks, everybody. Happy Friday.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you soon.
Cheers.
Thank you.